to the Unlock a Life You Love podcast. My name's Dr. Tim Teel, and I am the doc of Unlock. I am a retired ear, nose, and throat physician in 2023. I took a clean medical license off of my wall, retired it because I found more powerful healing potential living within my patients and living in the gap. There's a lot of information that lives between our physical world and the non-physical world of thoughts and feelings and emotions. And I'm absolutely convinced that we live in a very, very exciting day and time where we are, our understanding of the world that we live in and our place in it and how we can interact in it is evolving very, very rapidly. And what I saw happening, with some of this new information, in fact, it's not even new information, it's simply information that people are now willing to consider, is very rapid improvement in establishing flourishing good health and expansive well-being for anyone who is interested in attempting to work with the information that lives in the gap between these two worlds. So I want to start off right off the bat to say, listen, I'm a retired physician, but I don't want to be your doctor. And I don't want to be your pastor. No, I don't want to replace anybody. What I want to do, my objective, with this podcast and with this information and with our website and the products that we offer there, is to show people how to operate in the gap and make these two worlds talk to one another. Show people how these two worlds interact with one another by validating both worlds, both the physical and the non-physical world, and saying, listen, we don't have to be polarized, saying, oh, everything's physical or oh, everything's non-physical. No, both the physical and the non-physical world are real. And what I want to do with this podcast and with the information that we have available to us is show you how those two worlds bridge one another and how they interact with one another. And I couldn't be any more excited about it. In fact, I was so excited about it, I actually hung up my medical license and decided to teach this, dedicated really the remainder of my professional career to teaching people about the information that lives in the gap. And so, what is this gap anyway? So, we're going to explore this concept as we go along because there is a lot of information in there, and that's part of the reason why we said, you know what, there's enough information here. We could start a podcast, a website, and products and so forth that would serve people at a very, very high level. And so that's what we've done. The gap is the information, the language that actually connects both the physical and the non-physical world together. And I believe that information, that language, is actually the language of emotion, and it is everywhere. In fact, it was the very first language that every single one of us ever learned to speak. In fact, we didn't even have to learn how to speak it. So now, what am I talking about? Well, what's the first thing that a baby does when that child is born? What's the very first thing that they do? What do they do? They cry, right? What are they saying? What is that baby saying the very first thing that they do when they enter into this world? In fact, that's not when they entered into this world. It's simply when they got separated from their mother for the very first time. What did they do, and what were they? No, what are they attempting to communicate with you? And that no, that baby is simply saying, "I'm scared." You don't think about it from the kid's perspective. No, for the last 9 months, he's been floating around in his mother's belly, not knowing that he was in his mother's belly, but all he could hear was her heartbeat. He could hear her breathing. He can hear her bowel sounds, for crying out loud. And that's where he lives. All of his needs are met. He's comfortable. He's just floating around in amniotic fluid. And then all of a sudden, he wakes up one day and somebody's squeezing the daylights out of his head 1 minute. And the next minute, he's got a bright light shining in his eyes. It's cold. There's a whole lot of people standing around with masks and gowns, and everybody's rubbing on him. But here's the important thing: that baby can't hear his mother's heartbeat anymore. And he can't hear his mother breathing, and he certainly cannot hear the bowel gas that's running around inside of her belly. And so, what does he do? Ah! Ah! What is he saying? What is that baby saying the second that they cry? They're saying, "Help me," right? "I'm scared. Ah, I'm scared. I can't hear my mama farting anymore." It's a big problem. So what do? We dry off that baby. We give him back to his mother. Oh, all of a sudden he can hear mom's heartbeat again, and he can hear mom breathing. He can hear mom talking, and he can hear her bowel gas floating through her guts again. And so what does he do? Ah, I stop crying because now I know where I am again. So here's the really important question. Who taught the baby how to cry? You ever consider that? Who taught a baby how to cry, and how did they know how to do that? The second that they came into this world, nobody. The answer is nobody taught the baby how to cry. The kid already knew it. It's almost like there was a program running in that child. It was instinct. Well, where does instinct live? And we're gonna explore that concept through this podcast and through this website. But no, one of the things that we just simply take for granted is the fact that that a child born into this world already knows how to communicate with you. You ever considered that? And now here's the other really important question is what kind of a response is that? Is that a faith-based response? Is that a fear-based response? Is it a positive emotional response? Is it a negative emotional response? What is it? What is it? Of course, it's a negative emotional response. The kid's crying for help for crying out loud. It's the part of his ability to communicate that is hardwired into that child. That's exactly what lives in the gap. Okay. Nobody ever taught that baby how to communicate with you, and yet he can communicate with you from the second that that they're born. Is that not fascinating? I don't know about you, but I find that absolutely fascinating. Nobody had to teach the kid how to communicate. He was born with the survival skills to make it through this world. And what would have happened if he didn't cry? Think about it in this perspective. You know, we get lost in the fact that that we live in a world of tennis shoes and air conditioning and fast cars and good roads and food that lives on the shelf in the grocery store. But we haven't lived as human beings in a world that was like that for very long. In fact, if you step back a few thousand years or tens of thousands or 30 thousands of years ago, we've got excellent archaeological evidence that that people have been walking this planet for a very long time. And I don't want to get into an argument with anybody about creationism versus evolution and all the rest of that stuff. Um, we'll just try and stick with the facts, the best that we have of them. And the fact is that human beings have been on this planet for a very long time. We've got recorded history that goes back 10,000, 20,000 years. It's pretty cryptic beyond about 2 or 3 thousand years ago. But no, but we have recorded history that goes back easily 10,000 years, and we have excellent archaeological evidence that people have been on the planet for 30,000, 40,000, 100,000, 200, 300, 400,000 years easily. Easily. Let's just put that into perspective. If recorded history goes back 10,000 years, and we have archaeological evidence that says organized societies have been around for 100, 200, 300, 400,000 years. Um, what was most of that history like? Was it, you know, tennis shoes and air conditioning? Oh, it was very rough. These people lived short, violent, disease-ridden lives that ended quite short. Okay, and when you look at the physical bodies that we live in, I think you have to be absolutely out of your mind not to recognize that there is intelligent design not only in our bodies, but in the rest of the world that we live in. There is a tremendous level of organization in every single living ecosystem that is out there. So unquestionably, I am one of these guys that believes that we were designed intelligently, that we had an intelligent creator that organized things to help us survive. And that world that our caveman ancestors lived in for so very long, you have to think about it. If you were a loving creator, a loving God that created this entire ecosystem, would you have created it for that, for the last, few centuries that, that you and I have been alive? Or would you have designed it for the 99% of the time that, that our caveman relatives were walking around living short, violent, disease-filled lives? Well, who needs the most help? Is it the guys that that live in the last few hundred years, or the ones that lived in the three or four or 500,000 years before that? The answer is fairly obvious. It was the caveman that needed a little help. And so, an intelligent designer, an intelligent creator, would have designed a world to help that caveman out and help him to survive just a little bit. And it's those survival characteristics, it's those survival skills, it's those survival instincts that we need to understand in order to understand our place in the world today, and understand how those instincts and how the intelligent design of these bodies helps us to survive. And yet we still have these characteristics within us living in a modern age, and sometimes they just get in the way. Here's the really cool idea, guys. Here's the coolest information that I've come across in my entire life. When you understand the nature of the beast, then and only then can you help that beast get where the beast wants to go. Well, you and I are the beasts here, kids. And what we're learning, the information that lives in that gap between the physical and the non-physical world, is the information that we need to understand the language that connects those two worlds. And that's exactly what we're going to explore here in this podcast and on our website. So, where am I going with all this? A couple of things. The ideas that we're going to explore is that the food that we eat and the thoughts we think are so much more powerful determinants of our experience of life than we have ever imagined, because we have failed to recognize that we are cavemen walking around, that we had an intelligent designer, an intelligent creator that created a world to help us survive, and he created us as emotional, spiritual beings to have some innate survival skills to help us navigate those however long that we've been walking this planet. And it's in overcoming those survival skills that helps us to unlock a life we love, and hence the name of this here dadgum podcast. So, what I'd like to do is share some stories as we go along, and show you how we got to, or how I got to the conclusions that I have, because the stories, the experiences are what shapes our understanding and our learning, and it's those experiences that were really weird that changed my mind about an awful lot of things. I'm a board certified ear, nose, and throat guy. I did my training at some really interesting places in Chicago and New York City and Delaware, and some really awesome medical experiences. But there were some things that just kept coming up short. We continue to have treatment failures. We continue to run into all kinds of psychological, emotional issues in medicine, a huge number of problems that we just don't have solutions for, given the needles, the knives, and the pills that we're trained to use in medicine. And the biggest problem that I created in my own career and in my own life in medicine is I just kept asking questions. My patients weren't satisfied with the answers that I was giving them, and I wasn't satisfied with the answers that I was trained to give them, because we weren't getting the results that we were really looking for. And I'll tell you those stories as we go along, and how it got here, how it got us to here anyway. So come along. Come along with me on a fascinating journey. And I think we're going to together start to unlock some of the mysteries about who we really are, the truest nature of who we really are as human beings. And the key, genuinely, is emotions, and how emotion is put to use in our life is in fascinating ways. And one of the greatest instructors that I had in medical school was one who really showed me the power of emotion. And it was really interesting. One of my pathology instructors, he was actually a famous teacher in medical education. His name was Ed Gouillon, and Dr. Gouillon, everybody liked to call him Poppy. That's what he asked everybody to call him, was Poppy. But he was an incredible pathology instructor because he had this incredible ability to teach and get information and concepts into your long-term memory. In fact, he was so good at it that he would go out on weekends and put on weekend seminars for kids that were having problems getting past their first and second level board exams, and he could teach an entire year's worth of pathology in a weekend. And he was good at it, and his students remembered the information that he taught them. You know what his trick was? It took me a while to figure this out, but no, but the trick that he was using was telling fart jokes, for crying out loud, poop jokes, shaggy dog stories, and dad jokes. And the way that he used these is he would teach a concept. He would teach you one or two concepts, and then he'd tell you a stupid joke, and you'd do this. Oh, I don't believe he said that. When you elicit an emotional response in someone and you're able to attach it to information, and especially if you come with it with the intent of trying to get that information into your head, when you take information and attach emotion to it, we drive it into our long term memory. And that was this guy's genius in his ability to teach. And many other people are starting to learn these concepts and learn how powerful it is to get people to feel some form of emotion when they're trying to learn something. That's how we get information into our long term memory. Case in point, what were you doing September 11th of 2001? If you were over the age of 8 years old, I will guarantee you that every single one of you that's listening to what it is that I'm saying here can tell me exactly where you were at, exactly what you were doing. You could probably tell me what you had for breakfast or who you were drinking a cup of coffee with when you got the information about what was happening in New York City on September 11th, 2001. Okay. Now, next question. What were you doing September 11th of last year? It wasn't that long ago. Okay. Depending on when you're listening to this, maybe it was 5, 6, 8, 10 months ago, maybe a year, maybe two, maybe three. But what were you doing on September 11th, 2023? Do you have any clue? It wasn't that long ago. And yet you could tell me, you could go back more than 20 years into your long term memory and tell me exactly where you were at and what you were doing on September 11th, 2001. What was the difference? Okay. The difference is that on September 11th, 2001, every single one of us that experienced that information also experienced emotion when we experienced that information. Okay. What were you feeling? Fear, hatred, anger, sadness, despair, shock, awe, empathy, sympathy. The list would just go on and on and on about the different emotions that we were feeling when we saw those planes crash into those buildings and when we saw those buildings fall down and when we saw people, for crying out loud, falling out of those buildings from one human being to another, it is impossible to look at that and not experience some form of emotion. And that's why we all remember it, because we attached information to emotion and automatically it goes into our long term memory. This is the same thing that Dr. Gouillon used to teach me pathology was emotion, a little bit of giggling, a little bit of laughter, a little bit of guffaw. It's when we take information and attach it to that emotion, that's how we create long-term memories. Guys, emotion is critically important for developing long-term memories. Okay. Well, that was just one bit of information. Something fascinating happened to us all about 2020. This, we were thinking that the whole world was going to come to an end, and many of us looked around and said, "Gee, I might die here. I'm not necessarily living the kind of life that I want to live. And I saw something fascinating happen in the hospitals where I was working. I started to see personal development books laying all over the place. And when people weren't doing what it was that what they needed to be doing, they had a break or whatever, they'd pick up those personal development books and start reading them. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Well, it probably happened to you, happened to me too. Okay. And it was a fairly stressful time for all of us, and a time to do a little bit of introspection and self discovery, if you will. And I was one of those guys that did some of the exact same things. And I got online and started looking around, and I came across something called emotional freedom technique tapping. And I thought, wow, that really sounds interesting. And so I sat through some webinars and performed this very very simple mind body technique where we tap on certain meridian spots on our physical body that correlate with the amygdala in our brain. If you don't know anything about EFT, it is becoming a big deal in schools. We teach it all the time here on our website. In fact, we have a free program that people can sign up for and learn how to use it. But it's nothing more than a mind body technique where we are able to, I believe, hit the pause button on the emotional center in our brain when we are experiencing some unpleasant or unwanted or troubling emotion. We can recognize that emotion, tap on our body, hit the pause button on our amygdala, and just create enough of a gap or between us and the emotion that we're feeling, that we can ask the question, is this really serving me at the highest possible level or not? And so as I experimented with this during these webinar sessions, I actually felt a shift. I said, that's really weird, but it's also really nice, and I like it. And I felt better when I started using this technique. And through some really, really disturbing and fascinating personal experiences, and I'll share them with you in on a different podcast session. I started to feel a shift in my life and was able to create some distance between me and the emotions that I was feeling, and I didn't feel stuck anymore, at least on that particular topic. Well, I started taking these techniques into my clinic and started to see some fantastic results from people that were having problems swallowing pills to people experiencing pain. One of the most common procedures that we performed in my office was a flexible nasopharyngoscopy. What we were doing was taking a camera and putting it into people's noses, advancing it past the base of their tongue and look down their throat. And it sounds terrible, and it's a little intimidating when somebody comes to you with a cough that won't go away and thinking they got something stuck in their throat and they're scared to death they got cancer. And then you tell them, oh, by the way, we're just going to take this little camera and jam it in your nose and run it down your throat and take a look around. Usually the response looks something like this: eyes wide open and, patients tensed up like crazy. So I took this emotional freedom technique tapping procedure, taught it to my medical assistant that you're going to see here on the Unlock a Life You Love podcast, and said, listen, why don't we apply this technique and see how these people do? And the results were nothing short of miraculous. Patients that were freaked smooth out. When I came back into the room, we would spray some medication in their nose to decongest their nose and kind of numb it up just a little bit to make the whole procedure a little more palatable. And by the time I got back into the room, you could see that these people were visibly relaxed. They were still a little apprehensive about what was going on, but the massive emotional tension that they immediately felt was significantly mitigated by this very simple technique. And my medical assistant, Ashley, who became very good at it. And as we started to recognize that there were other emotional issues that would creep up in talking to patients, sometimes we would just simply turn her loose and say, Ashley, just go ahead and tap on that, work with them on it, and see what happens, and help these people relieve their suffering of these emotional problems, so that we can actually get down to the information that we need in order to treat the real problem. Fascinatingly, she got so good at doing these techniques that I would just turn her loose and let her tap with the patient. And once the patient started to feel a little shift, they would say, "Well, let's go explore this topic and this topic and this topic." And it got to the point where I knew Ashley was making some significant progress when she would come out of the room, and I'd say, "Did you make them cry?" And 9 times out of 10, she'd say, absolutely. And they feel so much better. Here's the fascinating part of that story. In addressing people as emotional, spiritual beings, addressing them in the truest sense of who they really are, we started to see dramatic changes in those patients and how they felt about being treated in our medical office. And over and over and over again, I saw these patients stop at Ashley's desk on their way out, tears in their eyes, patting her on the back, saying, "Thank you so much. That was so weird and so pleasant all at the same time." No, they were just dramatically grateful to that young lady, and we'll bring her onto this podcast very soon, as soon as we possibly can, actually, because she's the girl that really has the stories to tell. She wound up being one of the most powerful treatment strategies that we had in my office. It wasn't the doc, it wasn't the needles, knives, and the pills that we treated these patients with. It was treating them as emotional, spiritual beings, and we are all capable of doing these things. And it was my medical assistant, for crying out loud, who had the biggest impact on my patients. And together as a team of people treating both the physical and the non-physical parts of my patients, that we saw fantastic, miraculous suffering being relieved. And that, my friends, is exactly what it is that I signed up for as a physician. And it's precisely what I found in energy medicine techniques that relieved more suffering than I ever could with the needles, knives, and the pills. And that's exactly why I took that medical license off the wall. I sent it back to the state of Texas, and dedicated the remainder of my career to being here teaching these techniques. And I brought Ashley along with me as my business partner. So I hope that that creates enough curiosity to stick around and listen to the remainder of our sessions here, because my intention is to bring Ashley along, bring a lot more of the stories of healing and suffering being relieved by actually addressing patients, not only just as a piece of meat, but as an emotional, spiritual being, and finally finding the freedom to do that, not just as a physician, but as a human being, and bring the information, bring the experiences along from being a physician, and bringing the information that I've been exposed to since childhood, growing up in church, and all the rest of that stuff. Saying, "Hey, how do these two worlds connect?" They connect in the gap between these two worlds. And what we're going to explore in this podcast is the information that's in that gap. And so, thank you so much for your interest in being here. I hope that we've created enough interest to continue on and listen to some more of these stories. Because, my friends, I will tell you that we live in a fascinating day and age where the information that is coming out to help us live flourishing good health and expansive emotional well-being, and live lives that we've always dreamed of, is here. The information is here, and you can experiment with it on your own, with the information that we're going to bring to you. My name's Dr. Tim Teel. I want to welcome you to the Unlock a Life You Love podcast and welcome you to our website, Doc of Unlock, where we will bring you the information that you need to connect that physical and non physical world, the information that lives in the. So, appreciate you, being around. I'll look forward to talking to you again. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time on the Unlock a Life You Love podcast. I'm Dr. Tim Teel. See you.